as you have put it several times, to fight to make sure that he did not die in vain. But what do you mean by that? What can you do now, given what has just happened?
Well, the first thing we can do is make sure that the people who were responsible for his death have to pay a price for that. And it just started today. There's people, heads are rolling in the prison service.
The head of the prison where he died has been removed.
Indeed, and a number of other prison heads have also been removed. That's the first step. That's the bottom of the food chain. Now we have to move up to the investigators, the ones who were involved in the fraud, who were the ones who were pressuring him. They have to be removed. They have to be convicted. And then we have to look at the judges, the ones who willingly and knowingly kept him in prison when he shouldn't have been there. There's a lot of people who have their fingerprints on this whole thing, and they all need to be brought to justice.
Are you prepared to vest confidence in the words of President Medvedev, who, according to those who work with him, for example, in the Civic Society Council that he set up, has committed personally to make sure this investigation into the death of your lawyer is conducted fully and fairly? Do you believe that?
Only time will tell. I've been surprised, actually, that he stepped in. I'm happy that he stepped in. I'm happy that the first set of heads have rolled, but let's see. I mean, let's reserve judgment and see what he does.
Because you have, and again, this is a direct quote from you over the last few days, described Russia at the moment as a criminal state, which suggests to me that you believe the leadership, the very top of the Kremlin, is involved in this sort of organized criminality. Is that a fair reflection of what you believe? Let's
look at the facts. You had $230 million that was refunded from the state budget in 2 days on the basis of a fraud. Who can approve a $230 million tax rebate in 2 days? Somebody pretty high up. And then afterwards, we complained about it to many, many different departments of the government, and not one single investigation was launched, which suggests that some pretty high-level people are involved. Does it go all the way to the top, or does it go all the way to the middle of the top? I don't know. But what I do know is that it involves some very serious people who imprisoned a young, innocent 37-year-old lawyer and had him die under their custody.
You see, I'm just wondering whether you are prepared to accept, as some people say, and I'm thinking now about Elena Panfilova, who we spoke to today, who is the director of Transparency International in Russia, who says that there are clear signs that things are changing under Medvedev in Russia, that he is committed to his anti-corruption drive. He launched it with some fanfare in the middle of 2008, but in the interim, he has passed a raft of legislative measures and actions which have changed the way in which the public, the state, if you like, in Russia is supposed to operate. More transparency, more openness.
Well, at the moment, there were just words. So if the words...
Well, no, there are actions as well.
If a young man can be tortured to death, a young innocent man can be tortured to death in prison for exposing corruption, then we haven't addressed the issue of corruption yet. Just words. It's possible that there'll be actions, but at the moment, it's just words.
In the case of Mr. Magnitsky, clearly something went disastrously wrong, and a young lawyer is dead. But I'm just asking you to address the wider issue. I just looked at some figures. First half of 2009, Russian Prosecutor General's office claiming that 532 government officials were convicted on conviction-related charges. Another 764 law enforcement officials, 6,000 cases apparently pending. Do you not factor this into your view of the way Russia may or may not be changing?
I can tell you that Russia has changed for the worst, and I can see it day to day in my own experience in this whole case of $230 million fraud and the death of Sergei Magnitsky. We can see at every different turn there are people blocking our complaints. We can see at every different turn the judges are trying to cover up for their complicity in Magnitsky's death. We can see every single turn the fact that they won't allow an autopsy, and then they claim it was all done because of, it all happened because of heart failure in a healthy 37-year-old, a guy who was previously healthy. There is nothing improving in this situation at the moment. There could be. I mean, the president's words are very comforting. If you hear the president's words on corruption, it sounds very good, and it sounds like something that we'd like to see happen. But I think it would be a big mistake to somehow assume with those statistics that you just read that things are getting better in Russia, because they're not.
Let me ask you this. You made a lot of money out of Russia. You started, I believe, with a fund of about 25 million, and you turned it into something like 4 billion. And you got your money out before things went wrong for you, to the extent that, in essence, you survived financially unscathed, despite all of the travails we've talked about. You took a gamble on Russia. Personally, for a long time, it paid off. Do you believe it was worth it?
No, it wasn't worth it. The death of a young man makes the whole thing not worth it. If you make, first of all, this wasn't my money that I made. I invested other people's money.
Of course, but you made a substantial sum of
money. A lot
so.
less than those numbers. But what I can tell you is that what's happened to Sergei Magnitsky has made me reevaluate the whole thing. And it's, you know, I toss and turn about the decision of going to Russia because it's not just about losing money now. It's about losing a life. And that's something that you know, will haunt me forever.
And put it this way, do you wish, and hindsight is, as they say, a wonderful thing, but do you wish you had walked away, as you could have done in that period after 2005, when you realized that your own personal circumstances had changed, you couldn't go back to Russia, you could have walked away with the funds that you'd managed to get out of Russia, said goodbye, washed your hands of Russia altogether, moved on to a different form of venture capitalism, and just got Russia out of your system. Why is it that you decided to fight these legal battles?
What you have to understand is that I couldn't have walked away. What happened was the police defrauded us by going after our empty companies. As you said, we had already taken our money out of Russia. The police raided our offices in 2007 in Moscow to steal the companies that we had that were empty, that had paid a lot of taxes, to then get a $230 million tax refund.
I understand that. So in essence, they were defrauding your company, but they were also, perhaps more particularly, defrauding the Russian taxpayer, because the money that they stole in the end came from the Russian taxpayer.
But the way they went about doing it was by criminalizing my employees and myself. They opened up a criminal tax case to justify the raid of our offices.
But my point is, you were by this point sitting in London, and you had other financial ventures to think about. You could have lived with the fact that you could never go back to Russia, that the Russians had some sort of legal claim upon you to get you into a court to face charges, but you could have just said, to hell with that, I'm leaving Russia behind, it's a part of my life that's gone, and you could have moved on.
But that's not how it works. If all of a sudden a country starts accusing your employees or you yourself of criminal actions, you have to defend yourself. You can't just say, oh, they're an illegitimate country, I'm not going to defend myself.
So it will go on, will it? Despite the death of Mr. Magnitsky, the battle goes on.
Because of the death of Mr. Magnitsky, the battle goes on. We are going to vindicate Sergei, and we're going to bring the people responsible for his death to justice.
But in the meantime, what about the safety of those people who are working on your behalf in Moscow?
We don't have many people working on our behalf in Moscow anymore.
Do you have any?
Not really.
Let's also think about your business for a moment, if we may. Your idea in Russia was to move into a country where you thought there was major economic opportunity because you felt that many companies were undervalued, and they were undervalued because they were being so badly run. Corporate governance was so chaotic and corrupt that if you could only get in there as a shareholder and use that power and leverage to clean those companies up, you could make some very fat profits. Are you prepared to accept now that was wrong in the case of Russia?
Well, it wasn't wrong in the case of Russia. It was right until it became wrong. In other words, during the 1990s, we were in a period of time when things were horrible and they were on the transition to bad. And the way in which we could participate in that was by actually helping some of these companies get better by pointing out to the world how they were doing bad things. It was a strategy that worked, and it worked actually until about 2003, 2004. At that point, when we were fighting with the oligarchs, and even Putin was fighting with the oligarchs.
Well, and to be clear, you were supporting Putin. You were a great, to quote The Economist, a cheerleader of Putin around the time he came to power for the first time because you thought he was going to clean out the oligarchs.
And he was. For the first 3 years, his policies were working to my advantage and to the advantage of a lot of other people.
But to be plain about it, do you now believe that as long as Vladimir Putin, of course now Prime Minister, not President, as long as his shadow hangs over Moscow, that there is no chance of a cleanup?
Well, we're now seeing, he's not the president anymore. We have Medvedev, who's made a big anti-corruption push. And
no, I know, but that's why I'm now focusing, because you say Medvedev's words don't necessarily add up to actions. That's why I'm now asking you about Putin. Is it your belief, having seen everything you've seen over the last decade, that Russia cannot work as an economy where outsiders can come and invest with confidence until Putin has gone?
I'm not a political scientist. I don't know exactly how Russia works under who has power and who doesn't
Well, goodness
have power.
knows you've seen more of how Russia works from the inside.
Win.